Welcome to Veteran Resource Podcast, where you will meet nonprofit organizations focused on improving the lives of veterans and their family members. Here is your host, Jeremy Paris.
Welcome, everybody, to episode 79 of the Veteran Resource Podcast. I'm your host, Jeremy Paris. For today's thought leader, we have Don Hutcheson, who's a fellow podcaster running the podcast Discover Your Talent, Do What You Love. I have personal experience in not following my passion for a good portion of my life, and it is night and day from where I sit now, where not only am I following the things that I am good at, my talents, but I'm also doing the things that I love doing. Don has a world of experience, and I think that you're going to be able to learn a lot from what he's saying. There's a couple of stats that he throws out there that I picked up on, and you're going to hear these in the interview in better context, but I just wanted to share them with you now just to give you an idea of what you can expect from this interview. Don says that 86% of people, they're not in their sweet spot. They're not using their talent on a daily basis. And another stat, 1% of America loves what they're doing. 1%. Now, I'm willing to bet that many of you out there are listening to this and you're saying, yep, that stat is not surprising to me because I am not happy with what I'm doing. Well, hopefully you can pull some nuggets of great wisdom from Don out of this interview and put you on a better path. Don Hutcheson is a lifelong entrepreneur, inventor, author, and coach. He hosts the daily podcast, Discover Your Talent, Do What You Love, which he created to help you find your true talents and use them to build a career of success, satisfaction, and freedom. He's never had a boss and has created 6 innovative companies in advertising, publishing, coaching, and career planning, and now on the internet over the last 35 years. I know you're going to enjoy this one. I really enjoyed talking with Don, so let's jump into the interview. Don, welcome to the Veteran Resource Podcast. How you doing today?
Just great. It's great to be with you. Looking forward to our chat.
Yeah, I've been looking forward to having this conversation also. We talked, what was it, about a week ago or a little bit over a week ago?
Yes.
And it was, I felt like we connected almost instantly. And the conversation that we had, I just felt like you have so much to offer the listeners. I wanted to get you on for this Thought Leader Thursday.
Well, I felt the same connection, and I love what you're doing with your podcast. That's why I enjoyed reviewing it way back when, and I think you're just, anyway, I think it's wonderful work.
Thank you. Thank you. Speaking of backgrounds here, Don, you've got quite the background. So why don't we start off there? You were in the military, correct?
Yes. I was at Emory University in, 1967, and I had been a student in university and a student in high school doing well, but I just, just during that time, I decided that I didn't want to be on the educational path, and so my draft number came up, and I enlisted in the Army and took a test. I don't do tests very well, but I took a test for language aptitude, and it's one of the few things I do naturally, and I was lucky enough to go into the Army Security Agency and study Russian in Monterey.
Wow. Now, I took the D Lab. I don't know if they had the same one back then, but when I was trying to get into Special Forces, when I was thinking that's what I wanted to do, I had to take the D Lab, and I did really well on it, but I remember afterward coming out of it thinking like, I don't even know English anymore. I was so confused that I felt like I was talking funny for a little while afterward.
Well, I know. Well, when I went through, it was called the ALAT, Army Language Aptitude Test, and I thought it was Greek. I didn't, but there they were. It's natural abilities, I guess. I don't have a lot, but I guess I have it for that. But it was confusing.
So you were in the military for a while and then you transitioned out. I'm curious what that transition was like for you back then.
Well, I was very fortunate in my service. This was, right in the middle of Vietnam, and I just went to the language school for a year, and then went to radio school for a handful of months, and then went to Germany and used those language skills. So I didn't have a hard transition because I hadn't finished university, and I just reapplied to Emory, and they accepted me back, and I just went into university for the next couple of years to finish up that degree. So the transition that was the most interesting is that I had studied Russian language and literature because I'm an innate writer, and I was always fascinated in those periods of time. And I was set to be a teacher at a good private school in Atlanta. And I had all kinds of interests, but I thought that would be an interesting way to start. And a friend of mine, who's still a friend many years later, many decades later, was starting an environmental magazine, a recreational environmental magazine. So I was all set, had this teacher's job locked up, and he was working at Delta, but he was going to start this on the side and asked me if I would work with him. And my gut instinct told me yes, and that changed the course of my life.
And so you went on to get into the whole entrepreneur thing.
Well, absolutely.
So where did that lead you?
I did that for about 8 years, and you're right. I just headed off on an entrepreneurial path, and every 8 or 10 years, it seemed like something else would capture my imagination. So I was just blessed to I guess, have an inventor's mind, and I did the publishing thing there, and then I started an advertising agency from scratch that stayed in that business for 10 years, and I found it fascinating. I got into these industries, and I had to learn them from the ground up because, as I said, I didn't even have a business degree. I had a literature degree in Russian, of all things. But I'm curious, and I got into was in publishing for those first 8 years, and then into advertising for a decade. And we had some brilliant partners, and we had some good success. And then, went into my first venture into the space of educational life and career planning. I saw there was a need for a more holistic approach, and so I started a career planning company that I also did for another decade. So that got me about halfway through my career. So I can put in as much detail as you want to about this, but that took me up into my next venture.
And so the whole doing what you love side of it, you have this podcast, Discover Your Talent, Do What You Love. I'd like to hear the origin story of how this got started.
Yeah, it's interesting. It was at the ad agency actually that it started. We were blessed with some, like I said, had great partners, and we grew rapidly, and just a fine team of about 100 people. And I was having a good time. I was using my talents as a communicator and as a leader, and I just got fascinated looking at clients. We had Fortune 500 clients, and looking at clients and looking at staff and looking at the media people that called on us. And I was just curious about who naturally did what they did and seemed to flourish and who didn't. And I was talking to one of our team members about her career going from a private school to a good university. And she told me about how she did it and how she learned early on what her talents are, going through some very unique assessments. And that just led me into sort of a research phase where for about a year and a half, I read everything I could read about how people plan their lives and careers. And there's a lot of information out there on it, from psychology to developmental psychology to all the personal development areas and all the motivational stuff. And really what I discovered, Jeremy, was that everybody was, a lot of smart people doing a lot of smart things with assessments and courses, but it was piecemeal. That's the only way I can say it. And again, I didn't have any skin in the game. There was no reason for me to make that judgment. I was just trying to solve a problem like I did as an advertising exec. And so I thought, wouldn't it be interesting if instead of somebody, well, let me back up. So where you are in your life, where people are in their lives, is they learn how to grow and develop themselves from their family of origin and then through their educational systems, and then they get into a profession they go into the military or they go into a corporation. And reflection is not rewarded in a way. It's almost like we spend more time planning our annual vacations than we do our career.
Right.
If that makes sense.
Yeah.
And we'll just spend weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks talking about it and reading about it. But when it comes to understanding who Jeremy Paris is, who Don Hutcheson is, and what he wants, what we want, then we don't do it. And so we look at ourselves as we look at our careers as just a mechanical thing we need to do, and we sort of blunder along. And maybe we want to be a lawyer because we think that's prestigious, or we want to go into teaching, or we want to go into some area, and we're very externally motivated, externally driven, and we want to make money and provide for ourselves, but we don't look on the reflective side of this is the biggest decision you'll ever make. And what I determined as I was doing the research and as I did as I have over the last 28 years of other businesses, but staying fascinated on this topic, is it's the most complicated decision you'll ever make because we're so multifaceted.
Right.
We're not just Chester Bernard said we hire people for their skills, but the whole person shows up for work. And that pretty much summarizes it. We do. And so when you look at the statistics around the world, and the recent ones in the last couple of years from Gallup, they've interviewed millions of people, 86% of people are not in what I call their sweet spot. They're not engaged fully. Gallup gives them a dozen questions and asks what they think. And when they say, are you using your best skills and talents, 86% say no.
86%. Wow.
86, yes. Well, in America, where there's arguably more opportunities than anywhere else, it's still in the low 70 percentiles. You know how many people love what they do in America?
How many?
What percentage, according to this? 1%.
1% can actually
1%.
Say that they love doing what they're doing. Wow.
Perfectly expressed.
Well,
yeah.
Right now I fall in that 1%.
Well, yeah. Good. Well, that's beautiful. You're an anomaly, and the irony for me is that I always have too. Whether I've created and co-created some really exciting things, and they weren't all home runs. I mean, I've had a couple of really great home runs, but I've been hit by an economic downturn, and I've had my setbacks. But through it all, I did the work, what I call just doing the work about myself, and I stayed true to my personal vision about who I am and what I'm good at and where I can contribute. I've had four goals since I was out of college: create something out of nothing, do good, have fun, and make money. And I through thick and thin, I haven't wavered from those goals.
Nice. Yeah, getting back to the 1%. And the 86% overall, I can tell you that in my previous job that I just recently left, I was recently laid off. That was one of those where I exactly fit what you were just saying, where I was good at the job. I was good enough to continue to advance for 16 years, all the way up the food chain with that job. But at the same time, my passion wasn't there. I could do the things, but if I was really, really passionate about doing that job, then I think that I would have been twice as effective in that job.
Yes, you would, because there's a body of knowledge that's been around for about 90 years that has to do with natural abilities, and it's just what you're saying. Natural abilities are not, there's so many factors about who we are. We're a spiritual, emotional, intellectual, physical, social being. We're complicated, but our natural abilities, which have literally been studied for about 90 years, is how we're hardwired. It's in our DNA. It's how you communicate, problem solve, learn, etc. And you can figure that out. There's a process that you can figure that out. And so when you are working with those natural abilities, and that's the opposite, it's different from skills. That's what you learn. You can pick up skills out there in the world, but natural abilities. I mean, you've had friends that are engineers or who are writers or who are managers or who are dentists or whatever, and if the odds are that they were following at least a good percentage of their natural abilities. So when you figure that out, that's a key starting point. Then you can make decisions that benefit you, but also benefit the organizations you work with.
Yeah. Now, coming out of the military, when I came out, I only knew because I was personnel. And even though that was another thing where I was good at doing personnel and I advanced up that food chain, but I just wanted to get out of the cubicle. And I kind of was looking at other people that were doing the quote unquote soldiering, the infantry, the special forces, the Rangers. And I was saying, when I joined the military, that's what I thought I was going to be doing. And here I am in a 9-to-5 job sitting in a cubicle. And so I couldn't get away from that because there was a shortage MOS. And I decided I'm getting out of the military. And I get out and I knew that I wanted to get into technology. I like technology. I like computers. So that's all I knew. That's all I thought about was I'm going to get a job doing this. And I immediately jumped right out of the military. And I liked being in the military, but I didn't like being in a cubicle. And so I leave the military to go into a job where I'm in a cubicle for the next 16 years. And if I would have thought a little bit harder about not only what it is that I enjoy, but what do I not like? What do I not want in my future? Then I would have very quickly come up with, well, I don't want to be in a cubicle. And then I would have looked at the job that I jumped into as, well, if I do this, I'm in a cubicle again. So I really wish I would have looked better at and thought more about what it is I wanted out of life. But I think when you're getting out of the military, they don't talk to you about that. They go through, here's how to interview, here's how to write your resume. Let's get you a job.
Exactly. Yeah, it's what we talked about in the pre-interview. They talk about the end game and the tactics of it, but as we've talked about before, if you don't know where you're going, any road will get you there. So that's all they know, and that's the way our whole system has worked since forever, is that it's very outer directed, and so we get feedback from family and friends and counselors and coaches and HR people and bosses and peers, but that's just feedback. That's fine. But until you, number one, understand how complicated it is, how we are as human beings, how complicated we are, and that if you don't do the work to do what Aristotle said way back when, know yourself. If you don't know yourself, that's square one. That's where to start. If you know yourself, and you did know you didn't want to be in a cubicle, you knew two profound things, really. You didn't want to be in a cubicle, and you were interested in the technology side. Well, those are two big starting points. But it's so easy because we live in sort of a frantic society to say, okay, well, I know that, and then you went out and somebody offered you a job, and it wasn't stupid to take that job. You wanted to pay your bills and get going. But what I say to folks, and what we see on the podcast after 450 interviews, is you've got to stop. You have to stop it. When people say, what do you do? What do you recommend? I don't care if you're 18 or 80. Stop. Take time. Don't think you can solve this problem in 3 weeks. It may take 3 months. It may take a year for you to understand the different dimensions of who you are. And nowhere out there, except for people that have this little service or that little service or a piecemeal approach, nowhere out there is that really talked about. It's just not talked about.
Yeah, absolutely. The job that I jumped into was the first job that was available to me. And I didn't even look at another job It was like, oh, this one's offered and I'm making almost double what I was making in the military. Yep, I'm all over it.
Yeah, exactly. And again, that was not a horrible decision at all. But again, if you look at, we have so many chances to, like I said, after years of studying this and after all the interviews we've done in the last year and a half, there's always you know what it really takes, Jeremy? It usually takes some kind of setback to get people to reflect. Isn't that amazing?
Mm-hmm.
You know, they get sick or something happens. You got laid off. Okay. Well, what I would say to listeners, veterans or not, is you don't have to wait for that setback. Start out. It's like what Covey says: begin with the end in mind. Start out knowing that it's utterly complex. Start out knowing that there are endless resources, but you've got to do the homework to find out what those are. That's the catch-22. Okay, well, you know it's complicated, and you know that there are endless resources. Great, but nobody helps you find those, because everybody, if all you've got's a hammer, as the old adage says, everything looks like a nail. So if somebody has an assessment or they have a point of view about this and from what I've seen, virtually all of them are limited. So that they'll say, hey, go through this or do this or read this book. And what I say is look at all of it. Look at all of it. You know, get some feedback, of course, but talk to some experts and talk to several experts and see what their favorite modalities are or approaches to this. You know, there's scores and scores of assessments. There are all kinds of ways. What we came up with in the career program that we developed 28 years ago is most people just look at themselves as, they look at themselves as having certain talents and skills, and how do they position themselves into the workforce, and they look at the tactics of it, but we're a lot more intricate. So in our point of view way back then and today, until you understand how you're hardwired to be in the world, the skills that you've learned, the natural talents that you've got, as well as the inborn talents, what your passions are, you know, what gets you fired up, what your personal style is, you know, what your core values are, you know, where you are age-wise in your stage of development. Until you understand all those things, what were the core values from your family? Until you look at all of that, and I know it sounds overwhelming, but it's a lot, but it's not overwhelming. Until you do that, you can't really develop that strategy and that personal vision that'll work for you the rest of your life. And you'll keep tweaking it and working on it. But when you do that, you have a strategy that'll put you in that, all things being equal, will put you in that 1%.
Absolutely. And if you're out there and you're listening to this and you want an example that's really going to make sense to you, think of it this way. When you're doing land navigation, the very first thing you have to do is you have to orient the map. You have to figure out where you are on this map after you orient it and figure out which way is north on the map and which way is north in real life. You could take that same situation here. You have to discover who you are first, what it is you are all about, and then you could look at what direction you want to go and shoot your azimuth in that direction.
Yes, it's when you told me that, use that metaphor when we talked last week, I thought it was exactly right. And again, it's just not that point of view. We pay lip service to it. The person that's done the best job of that over the last literally 40 years, it's amazing, is Richard Bowles, who wrote a classic that he keeps updating every year called "What Color Is Your Parachute?"
Oh, I read that a long time ago.
Well, you were ahead of the game. I mean, that was a savvy thing to do, because Mr. Bowles had figured out the only one that I've seen really that has figured out a holistic approach until we came along in 1992, but he's done a great job of that, and he updates it every year. So it just allows you that perspective, like you're saying, to orient the map.
Right before we got on to this conversation and started recording, we were doing a little pre-interview, and you had talked about a Google search that you did, and I'd like for you to share that with the listeners right now.
Well, I just being a veteran and having friends that are veterans, and we've had many veterans. Actually, I don't know how many we've had now on the show, but out of 450, we've had a couple of dozen. I was just curious to see what awaits the veteran when he or she gets out of whatever branch of service and comes back into the work world. And again, a lot of good people. I'm a huge fan of the VA. They've been really great in terms of medical stuff and all kinds of other services. But there are lots of resources, but it's all the tactical stuff. It's here are all the jobs available in your town, and here are all the connecting points, and it's all tactical. I don't see, and I didn't spend days on it, but I spent a while. I don't see that many resources for helping you do the kind of things you and I've been talking about to orient your map. Yourself as not just somebody who's looking for a job, but who's looking for a life, who's looking to use more of their talents than not, and not be in that 70% or 86% that are going to work and slogging through instead of being fired up about how they can add value to themselves, their family, and the rest of us. So it's just where people start, and it's all we got. That's all that most people think there is. But as we've been talking about, there are other resources.
Absolutely. And picture this. Picture getting up in the morning and going to a job that you don't like. I'm sure that everybody here at some point in their life has been in that situation where you wake up in the morning and you just know that you have to go to this job that you don't like, and the feeling that you have that overwhelms you when you put your feet on the floor and you're just sitting there in the bed like, oh man. But then you picture instead waking up to something that you are super passionate about. That feeling when you swing your legs out of bed and you just throw those covers off and you just can't wait to get going and go jump in the shower and hurry up and get going so that you can get to this thing that you're passionate about. If that was what you were feeling every single morning when you woke up, I mean, how can life be bad when you're following that?
Well, it can't be. And one of my partners in the ad business, Virgil Hutcheson, used to, when he interviewed people to work at our firm, would say, as he would be talking about what they were doing, and of course they were in the ad business, but he'd say, well, do you like it? I mean, what about it do you like? Do you fog up the windshield on the way to work in the morning because you're breathing so hard? Because it's just what you're saying with being in bed. Do you fog up the windshield in the morning because you're just exhaling? You're got so much passion and energy. Well, this psychologist at the University of Chicago, whose book I read a long time ago, he wrote a book called Flow. His name it's a mouthful. It's Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi. Don't ask me to spell that, but they can look up, your listeners can look up Flow, okay? And he studied, the approach that's needed in this, in my opinion, is the art and science of career and life planning. And we get a lot of the art and a lot of the science, but we don't get both. And it's both, in my studied opinion. But Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi studied just countless people, and he found that when you are using your talents, and that's the reason for the podcast, when you are using your talents and when your life is in sync from the perspective of, all the dimensions of yourself, from your skills and your interest and your personal style and your values, it's just what you said. You're in that flow, and time almost stands still. I mean, and it's no job. I mean, even in my career, I'm in that 1%. I was just too bullheaded at times to, even in hard times, I just simply wouldn't compromise. And I don't know, that was just the luck of the draw. But you have hard times. I've been through plenty. But if you're still using those talents and in sync, you've got a personal vision, which I've had since I was a very young man, then that guides you. It's like orienting that map in your beautiful metaphor. And so that's what we know from the research that's been going on and continues to go on. And it's very powerful.
That's great. So Don, if these veterans are listening right now, they're hearing what you're saying, and they're really connecting, and it's really resonating with them, and they really want to follow their passion, but they don't really know how to get there. What advice would you have for them?
Well, as I said earlier in the interview, I did an ebook. And in fact, you know what, we have just reintroduced that ebook. And actually, it's all free, an ebook and a slide series over about 6 weeks. And it's called What Do Highly Successful People Actually Do to Succeed? 12 Proven Career Building Strategies to Help You Do What You Love. And it embodies this whole conversation in the chat we had last week. And that would be a good starting point. There's no obligation. I mean, zero. We're not selling anything. We're just, as I say in the introduction to this series that we did, very short, like 3-minute slides every twice a week. We say that this is a Kickstarter to get you thinking like you and I have been talking about the last 30 minutes. So, I'd say that would be one good place is to go to our website, discoveryourtalent.com, and just get that free infographic and that free slideshow. So that's a choice, and based on 28 years of research. And the other is, I would tell them to march right out and buy Richard Bowles' book. I've never even talked to Bowles, and we're in the same field for a long time, but I admire him profoundly. What Color's Your Parachute? Get the current edition of that. And it's imposing, it's 400 pages, but hey, this is only the rest of your life. And I would get that book, and I would just work through that sucker. And I would just take the time. And the main thing is to not do a knee-jerk reaction, and to realize that you own this decision, and you have to take full responsibility for it. You have to create your own goals. And it's going to be fearful. There's going to be fear. You can do it. Hey, you were just in the military serving your country, and there's plenty of fear there at times. And if you have the discipline and the organization to be in the military, then you have the discipline and the organization to figure this part out. And the final thing I'd say, and this is hard in our rational-based society. I mean, I'm all for logic and intellect, but it's only a piece of the equation. You got to trust your gut. You got to trust your instincts. That first decision I made, not taking that cushy private school job and joining a startup that was underfunded, changed the course of my life for 40 years. It's the best decision I ever made. So you've got to trust your gut, and that comes with quiet and just not looking outside yourself. You can get feedback, but only you know the answer. And as I say at the end of the podcast, every one of us is born with unique talents and gifts. It's in our DNA, and it's in there right this second. Every listener that's listening right this nanosecond, you know exactly what you can do and how you can contribute. And sure, there are obstacles, but you can find it. And you will find it if you do some of the things we're talking about here.
Outstanding. Don, I'm going to make sure that I get that link from you so that I can put it in the show notes, and then they could get over to that slideshow and check that out.
Good. Great. That's wonderful. And, they can listen to the show too if they, we do it 5 days a week, and it's all free. It's on iTunes or Stitcher, and they can listen to it on their phones or in their car. And these are just, I guess we've posted 380 something now in the last 18 months, and they can listen every day for 25 or 35 minutes to a man or woman around the world who's dealt with this and has come up with their own unique solutions, and for the most part are buying away or in their sweet spot and not looking back. So that would be a constructive thing to do too.
Absolutely. And I would recommend that you do that, because it's going to help to stretch your brain, help you to think of things that you never would have even thought of before, or add on to some ideas that you might have of a direction you might want to go. You might hear something that somebody else says about their journey that you might want to add to your own.
Oh yeah, well said. That's exactly what happens. And when people get on the show, we have an extensive questionnaire that we ask them to read over anyway, and to prod their memory for turning points. And it's amazing what happens when they reflect back on those moments when they were at a decision about what to do and what courses to take or what jobs to take, and there were different things that spawned them on in the right direction. And it's very I get as fired up about the guest interviews as the listeners. I think it's very gratifying.
Yeah, I hear you. That's the same with mine. Every single time I'm doing the research initially to find out, what questions I'm going to ask, what direction I'm going to try to take the interview. And I get pretty fired up just learning about the guests. And I can't wait to hear the answers they're going to say to the questions that I'm going to ask, almost as much as I think the listeners.
Yeah. What's more important on the planet than we're here, and so what's more important than figuring out who we are and how we can contribute? And because if we figure that out, then we win and our loved ones win, but so does the rest of society. That 70% people not in their sweet spot costs this. Read the other day, I'm going to forget the statistic, but it's just hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars a year in underproductivity and underperformance. The individual loses and the corporation loses and their customers lose because people are not being their best. Michael Jordan tried to play baseball, right? He couldn't hit a curveball, but he went back to the NBA and won 3 more championships. He was a genius basketball player. So he listened to his instincts and followed his instincts and used his talents.
Absolutely. Well, Don, thank you so much for coming on the podcast today and sharing everything with the listeners. One more time, can you give the link to your website and how people can connect with you?
Sure. It's just discoveryourtalentpodcast.com, and they can find that infographic and that slideshow there. And they can also contact us. There's a contact page, and they can contact us and fill out the little quick form and give us ideas or tell us how we can serve them better. And I'd love to be connected with them. That would be great.
Excellent. Well, thanks again, Don, and you have an amazing day.
You too. It was a great pleasure.
Thank you so much for listening to episode 79. I really hope that you enjoyed it and that you took something from it. I want you to get connected with Don, so check out the show notes. Go to veteranresourcepodcast.com/079. And if you haven't joined the newsletter yet, while you're there at the top of the page, you're going to see a gold strip. It just asks for your email address. Very simple. And that way I can keep in touch and let you know about some new things that we have going on, and I'll keep you in the know. That's all I have for you this week. Next week, we'll be talking with Peter Klein from Vet Motorsports, and that is a really cool interview. So I'll see you then.